we've got a true environmentalist. And not only that, he was a former pro-wind and pro-solar advocate. He's a convert and almost a lone voice in the environmental movements. Steve also is a widely published nature photographer, and I can attest to this because I bought his calendar and it's absolutely beautiful. He takes us to unique and beautiful places that are true remnants. And my mate, Dr. Bill Burrows, says they're few and far between. What concerns Steve and I, at the rapid rate, these not only being demolished, but absolutely desecrated. He was a founding member of Rainforest Reserves Australia, and while he was in that group, he produced an absolutely unique mapping tool which showed the full scale of renewables. For that, rainforest reserves in Australia have been widely punished. I introduce Stephen. Thank you, Steve.
It's a great pleasure to be here today, and I was squirming in my seat most of this morning because I really enjoyed the presenters, but I just see the hypocrisy that is going on between, making life difficult for our primary producers, and then what happens to other sectors of the industry, other industries, and so forth. And that's what really I find so frustrating. And I think my presentation will showcase that and articulate that to you. So I'll give you a bit of a background. Yep. I'll just turn the pointer on. Yeah, so just briefly, a quick brief outline of myself. Rainforest Reserves Australia, we've had to close down, and that's another story because, I won't go through that, but we've set up a new organisation called Australian Biodiversity Alliance, and what we do is we're an environmental charity group focused on the rehabilitation of rainforest, and we also operate the Cassowary Rehabilitation Centre on the Atherton Tablelands of far north Queensland. So we help facilitate landowners that do want to do revegetation works on their land. It's all voluntary, and it mostly involves the revegetation of riparian zones, creek banks, steep banks, and also trying to connect protected areas together. So there's a corridor of rainforest for wildlife to move between those areas. And that adds to the genetic diversity of that wildlife. So we've planted tens of thousands of trees over the years. We run our own little nursery. We propagate our own plants, our rainforest trees. And we own and operate Australia's only Cassowary Rehabilitation Centre. So we bring in injured birds, either from dog attack or car strike, and we rehabilitate those birds. They're really big rainforest birds, the heaviest birds on earth, and then re-release them back into the wild. And that's been a great organisation. We've achieved some really great outcomes. But what we saw happening was the movement of this renewable energy sector into our neck of the woods. And we saw firsthand what was occurring, what was happening. And our charter is really to protect and restore biodiversity, but the renewable energy sector was coming into town and just destroying biodiversity. And by that I mean places of really good high remnant, high elevation, high biodiversity areas. And it all sort of started for me in about 2016, 2017 with the construction of Queensland's very first industrial wind farm called the Mount Emerald Wind Farm, only about 45 minutes west of where I live in Coranda, near Cairns. And I was pro-wind, pro-sun. We need to build these renewables. And even though this particular wind farm was going in a really good remnant plateau, high elevation plateau, that's the price we need to pay. And I was actually engaged by the company called Ratch to photograph some elements of the construction of this wind farm. And what we've got here is a 56 metre blade, 20 tonne, and there's 55 wind towers on this site. So you can sort of see the scale there, and you have to realise that this is an old generation turbine from 2016, 2017. The new generation are basically twice the length of this. Okay, this is 55 metres. The new generation wind towers are around 85 metres, even pushing 100 metres for their 7.5 megawatt Vestas. So we thought this was big, but the new generation are even bigger. So as you can see, roads need to be modified, bridges need to be engineered to carry these big weights and loads and wide loads. For example, the nacelle, the centre gearbox for a wind farm, wind turbine, is around 300 tonne, so 300 tonne. So the roads have to be engineered for those weights. And in actual fact, the Caban site, the power lines had to be lifted over in the main street of Ravenshoe to get these big components down the main streets. Like I said I'm a keen bushwalker, love wildlife, love our wild places, and I used to bushwalk up in this area, Mount Emerald, quite frequently. And I'm there with a couple of botanists, and there was 5 endangered plant species, endangered plant species under the MNES, which we've learnt all about today. And they were going to be sacrificed for this wind farm. But we thought, well, that's the price we need to pay. That's a typical shot looking across the plateau. But what it is today is an industrial facility, carved up with roads, transmission lines, substations, and 55 wind turbines. It's now an industrialised area. To give you a sense of scale, I can't use the pointer, but you can see a small a bus. That's like a 55-seater school bus down below that turbine, to give you a sense of scale. But the new ones are even bigger. And like I said, they need to blast out the roads to get these components, blast out the ridge lines and to get the components into these remote locations. These are remote locations, high elevation areas. That's where the wind resource is through a lot of Queensland. And to access those places, the roads need to be pushed up into the high elevation Great Dividing Range or the coastal ranges. And a huge amount of civil earth moving is required. But so Mount Emerald was built, it became operational, and I thought, well, that's all we need, because the proponents, the developers and politicians were telling us that this wind farm was going to deliver power to 90,000 homes. And I thought, well, 90,000 residents, I suppose, but there's 100,000 people that live in Cairns. And I thought, well, that's great, because now we're carbon neutral. The city of Cairns is carbon neutral with one wind farm. That's how naive I was. And we're still being fed this lie by proponents and politicians that put in a wind farm that's going to power 100,000 homes or 200,000 homes. And I'll talk about that more later. So that was built, and then all of a sudden there was a new development called the Caban wind farm. And I had a tip-off from someone within government department saying, Steve, the dozers are in there, document it, because this is another big wind farm going into some really good classified remnant vegetation. So I went out there with the drone, tried to get footage. Some of this footage I actually put on a high-vis vest, jumped into my mate's white Land Cruiser, looked like a tradie, and drove on site. Released the footage on YouTube the next day. The day after that, big boom gates, full-on security guards. And what has happened ever since, all of these wind farms now are very heavily fortified with security guards to keep people like me away, particularly flying drones. In actual Lotus Creek, you go stay in the road reserve, nothing illegal. Security guards will come out, intimidate you, and they'll bring out their own drones and fly a drone 10 metres over your head to try to intimidate you to move on. So that they don't want this footage to be seen. Yeah, so this is the Caban wind farm. So huge amounts of destruction in remnant forests. And we had speakers here this morning talking about how hard it is to knock over one tree or keep a fence line open. These are huge, big road corridors being punched through this area. This is all great, greater glider habitat, koala habitat, the lot. It's all there. Northern quolls, it's all there. So really big civil earth moving. So they're the turbine pads. There was 28 here. This is only a small wind farm, mind you. So as you can see here, this is one of the ridge lines that's been carved off, been blasted out by dynamite, and you can see the concrete foundations in the foreground. Those concrete foundations are 1,000 cubic metres of reinforced steel and cement. So 1,000 cubic metres. In an average 3-bedroom home, there's about 28 cubic metres. So that gives you a sense of scale. So you can see the huge amounts of cut that go into the mountainsides. And you have to realise those foundations need to cater for an 800-tonne crane to lift a 300 to 400-tonne nacelle gearbox in. So the roads need to be engineered to cater for an 800-tonne crane. So the local residents were hoodwinked. They never knew that these towers were going to be the height they were. They didn't realise the amount of low-frequency sound they're going to emit. They didn't realise the amount of damage it was going to do to their local wildlife. They don't see wedge-tailed eagles or anything like that anymore. They're all gone. All the raptors go. So now they're starting to resist and fight and push back against the other wind farms that are proposed in their area around Ravenshoe, Tamulin and Caban. They weren't notified about the lights that flash at night, so their western horizon is now an industrial zone. So the lights are constant red, but the blades spin in front of the lights and they flash. So you've got all these red lights flickering on the horizon in there. So they used to see the nice night, the starry sky at night, and now it's just light pollution. The impact on Saris cranes and wildlife is huge. Every time I visit the base of one of these towers, I always see a minimum of 1 dead bird or bat, sometimes up to 4. These are some of the species in one day. A white-striped freetail, northern freetail bat, Pacific swift. The Pacific swift is a critically endangered species, migratory bird, under the EPBC Act. Yep, and they fly in flocks. They follow insect movements after rain events. So all you need is one big flock to come through and you'll wipe out the entire population. On one visit, there was a half-dead little red flying fox underneath with a broken back. Had to ring up wildlife carer. They came in and euthanised it. And you don't get the data. You need to do freedom of information to try to get the data for dead bird and bats to get their surveys. They try to keep this secret. It's not common knowledge. So those wind farms were built near me up in North Queensland. I thought, well, what's coming? Because this is totally unsustainable. We just can't build hundreds of these. But in actual fact, we are. So myself and the volunteers in Australian Biodiversity Alliance put our heads together and we searched the internet. We went to websites, portals, EPBC Act, what's in the pipeline, state approvals, local councils. And at the moment, we've got about 319 renewable projects earmarked for Queensland. That consists of BESS batteries, pumped hydros, solar, utility solar and wind. So what I've got here, you can't read it obviously, but the name of the project, the tech type, the technology type, and also a web link. All of this is referenceable, so you can reference all of it. None of it is made up, it's not hypothetical. So if you collate that down, we've got about 5,100 wind towers proposed for the state of Queensland. New South Wales has 9,000. I've got to laugh, it's crazy. 154 utility solar projects are at different stages of the approval process in Queensland. 91 BESSs. The BESSs are very hard to find because they go to local council. I think the legislation has been changed a little bit with BESSs, so it triggers state legislation. It's huge, absolutely huge. The length of transmission lines is unknown. We don't know. No one knows. Chris Bowen flippantly says 10,000 kilometres. He's got no idea. You have to remember 30% of your electricity bill is transmission and distribution, and we've got to build about 10,000 kilometres, as what Chris Bowen says, to connect all of this junk energy together. And we hear a lot about really good projects, and there are, some projects that may be considered good, but the Kidston pumped hydro, for example, is held up on a pedestal by the Australian Greens and the Labor Party as being a great renewable project. And on the face of it, it may seem to be that way, where you've got the old quarry pits that have been repurposed as dams, and then the old tailings dam covered in solar panels. So there's no land clearing involved. But no one talks about stage 2, which is around 2,000 hectares of Thermida forest to be cleared to make it viable. Okay, so forests like that, which is remnant. And I can talk to you, I can do a whole presentation about solar farms like this in Queensland, earmarked to clear, where remnant has to be cleared for solar panels. In actual fact, the Waldoga solar farm cleared of concern remnant vegetation for solar panels. And then the offset area was a hillside like this as an offset area. Yes, I've visited a few solar farms, and in New South Wales, for example, the Beryl Solar Farm, we hear a lot about the coexistence of livestock with solar. I'm yet to see the coexistence of livestock with solar farms. I think it does exist at places like Wellington, for example. I don't know how effective it is, but in Queensland we don't really run sheep. I'm not a farmer, I don't know, but it's more, cows and so forth, and cows are completely incompatible with solar. And in actual fact, this one here, the Beryl Solar Farm, I went to this site, there was no sheep. So I door knocked the neighbours and I said, have you seen any sheep? And they said, well, they did have sheep in there, but 2 got caught up in the hydraulic rams because the solar panels move. They got caught up, died, and they pulled the sheep out. The other problem they had here was sheep were nibbling the cables and destroying the kit. So I think the new generation solar farms have the conduiting underground or up above the panels, I'm not too sure. So this doesn't run sheep. And you can see where they've used Roundup or herbicide underneath the panels. The Waluga Solar Farm, just up here, I think near Gympie Way, I visited that with Katie McCullum recently, and that was installed, and then about a year later, a hailstorm came through and knocked out about 30% of the panels. And residents there saw the panels being bolted off, put on the ground, a dozer came through, picked them up, put them into a dump truck, and most likely to landfill. But again, that's only stage 1, stage 2. You can sort of see that in that top left picture. There's a solar farm in the far distance, but that's going to be connected with solar. That will be one continuous big line of solar. There's quite a few big solar farms proposed in that area. So if we look at the state of Queensland, all those red lines are all the renewables that I've mapped, because I've got a cartographic background, map making. So I thought, well, let's start trying to map this, because it's good and proper to say there's 5,000 wind towers proposed, but what does that look like in a spatial context, spatially across the state? That's what interests me, because I love biodiversity, I love wild places. And where is it going? Is it going into some of these areas? And sure enough, it is. And if we just zoom into, say, somewhere like between Gladstone and Rockhampton, we can sort of understand what's going on. So you can see the grey lines, they're the high voltage lines. They're the existing high voltage lines, so 275 kV lines mostly. And in the last 4 years since the Albanese government was elected, this is what's happened with renewable projects being proposed in this little small area of Queensland. The red lines are the haulage roads for wind farms. Okay, so new roads that need to be cut into mountains. So that's the current state of play. There is actually a couple of new ones down to the south that I haven't mapped yet. So that's sort of like the spatial footprint of what we're looking at. And what you can see there is that these wind farms are hard up against the existing transmission lines. They don't really care about the tenure type. They do not care about vegetation or bushland or matters of national environmental significance. That is not even their consideration. The consideration is they want to be hard up against existing lines because it's cheap. And it's unfortunate that that line is on the western side of the divide, and then just to the east you've got the high mountain ranges. So there's the wind resource up in the mountains and the high voltage down below, and they can connect. And that's what they're doing. So if we look at some of these sites, pretty much all of those sites there have huge impacts on matters of national environmental significance, except Boomer Range is a bit less, and also the Banana Range wind farm. But if we look at Lotus Creek, for example, you can see there that it's going all in that green area, which is classified remnant. Yellow is of concern. Flew a drone, got a shot pre-construction, which is the photograph on the right. The left photo is a Google Earth 3D visualisation, and I've overlaid where the roads are going, and you can sort of faintly see the black dots where the turbines are going to go. That's the country, and this is what they're doing to all the ridge lines. Yeah, so I've got audio here, but it's not coming through. So this patch of forest here, koala, that's gone. That's been bulldozed. That's a lay-down area for vehicles and dongers and work dongers. That's the office area. So that's gone. All those mountains in the background are gone. They've been flattened and dynamited out. So if you want to clear trees, just call yourself a renewable energy company. Yeah. 101 koalas were found in the ecological reports, 138 greater gliders, and just smashed to smithereens. And these places on top of the mountains have existed because of its rough, really rugged topography, remoteness, and these are the places that have survived in terms of high biodiverse areas. And it's these areas that are now being targeted by the wind industry. That mountain in the distance, that's been flattened, been dynamited out. I'll just fast forward a bit. Yeah, so this, I'll just go to here. Yep, so they clear a big swathe, about 70 metres wide, because they need these wide roads for the sweep of the blade. So if these blades are 85 metres long, they need the sweep to be able to get these blades up these mountains. So that's looking down the range of mountains. That mountain, they dynamite out those. So you see how it's a knoll? They use explosives to knock the top of that off. That's a quarry. There's 3 concrete batching plants on this site because of the vast distances. So they've got a concrete batching plant to the north, south, and in the middle. So they're not moving concrete. Huge amounts of water coming out. They actually ran the well dry, and they're trucking water in for the concrete batching plants right now as we speak. And this is just a recent helicopter trip that I did over the site. That's for one pad. You can see that that's a drill rig drilling down to put explosives into the top of that knoll. They place explosives and blow it out. You can see digging out one of the concrete foundation pads. Yeah, huge amounts of cut and fill. So this project was set up by Eperon, and then it was proposed by Eperon, then it was sold to Arc Energy, which is Korea Zinc, then it was sold to Vestas, then it was sold to Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, then it was sold to CS Energy, which is our state-owned energy corporation. So we own this. Steve Miles bought this project off Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners for 1.3 billion with a B, which equates to about $28 million per turbine. To show you what they do to the ridges. Yeah, so this was taken by an on-site worker. Yeah, so, yeah, they blast out. Sorry, yes?
Who owns the actual land structure there?
It's 2 pastoral leases. Yeah, pastoral leases, yeah. Yeah. This is the face of renewable energy in Queensland. This is not clean, it's not green, it's not cheap. Yeah, so if we move along, Clark Creek, for example, this is Clark Creek, stage 1 down the bottom, stage 2. You can see stage 2 going into yellow, which is of concern. Not one green group put in a submission against this project. In actual fact, they haven't put in a submission against any of these projects. It's just our group and a few others, like Protect the Bush Alliance and a few others. Small groups. Sorry? It's green energy. They've got a mandate to do whatever they like. So you can see here the dozers there on the ridge lines, they cut it up and then they just blast out the ridges for the turbine pads.
It's a green running that one, isn't it? Fortescue?
Yeah, that's Squadron. This is Squadron Energy, Andrew Forrest. Yeah. Yeah, at the same point, so Andrew Forrest is building this. At the same time, he's building a gas import plant at Port Kembla to bring in gas because he knows when the wind doesn't blow, he needs his gas. So he's tying up the energy market.
That's gas we've already sold.
Yeah, we sell it to Japan and buy it back, yeah. So this picture here, all those ridges in the distance are now gone, and then Lotus Creek are those ridges, that skyline in the distance is Lotus Creek Wind Farm. And that's sort of like what it looks like today. That's half of this wind farm looking south, and then you look at it to the north, and like I said, there's another 100 going beyond that, and then another 48 beyond that, so another 150 towers beyond these. I can't remember these ones. These are probably 200. I can't recall, sorry. I did look up, is it Dalaka? These are 220, but they're only 4.5 megawatt Vestas. The ones in Caban, they're 5.5 megawatt and they're higher. The Dalaka ones are quite small. The new ones are about 270, the ones that are being proposed, 270.
182 on that Clark Creek one so far.
That's right, including stage 1 and stage 2, yeah. This is Moa Creek Wind Farm. This is west of Rockhampton. This is sitting with Murray Watt right now. So as you can see, there's grazing land down below, and then this beautiful plateau, big, vast plateau, very similar to Mount Emerald, of good quality remnant. And then I do the overlays to show where they're going to blast out with explosives, and they're going to blast right out the top of that cliff line to put turbines. That's all going to go. And what we're seeing with Murray Watt, you know, the Federal Environment Minister, they're not going to stop these things. There's just not enough pushback.
Why isn't all these videos and this sort of stuff on mainstream media?
You tell me. Yeah. This is Black Mountain. They need to knock about 20 metres off the height of this mountain, so blast it out 20 metres to bring the height of the turbine down so it doesn't interfere with aviation, and therefore they don't need to install lights. Yep, blast it out. This gentleman here, he let me onto his property. He's very concerned. He had a dedicated nature refuge in the foreground, and the wind farm is on that middle ridge going west. So he's going to have wind towers on the boundary of his area, of his property. He can't do anything about it. So he's going to have these are actually the big turbines, around 250 to 270 metres high. Yes, I did a bit of video out of a helicopter. Basically, everything you see there, every ridgeline, every hilltop, blasted out. Moving along, if we look at this is under construction now. Again, CS Energy bought this, so we own this project as Queensland taxpayers, and lots of heavy machinery. This is not the amount of CO2 being emitted for these projects is off the chart, and it's just not the clearing of the forest, it's also the carbon sequestration that's being lost from destroying forests. It's just insane. All that land there, that's cleared. I think there's a substation going there. I've got to check the maps, but that was all cleared. Yeah, try to do that for a dam or something, you know. Mount Hopeful, another one, crazy. They found yellow-bellied gliders and northern quolls up the top of those ridges there. Really good remnant. That's all going to get blasted out. Plebiscite's already approved that. It's going ahead. What we also do is, because I've got a cartographic background, is I generate 3D mapping for communities. So a lot of communities reach out and they want some animations to try to understand where these turbines are going. So that's what we do. The heights of the turbines in these animations are high. They're not to scale, but it gives you a good idea of where these turbines are going in relation to surrounding areas and people's properties. That's the Mount Hopeful wind farm, for example. Yeah, but I'll keep going. Another one, Callide Ranges. Yellow is solar. That's proposed solar. So see the Smoky Creek solar there in the bottom. That's 2,500 hectares of solar. 2,500. This Callide Ranges one should not go ahead. This is rugged, incredible terrain. And yeah, from my perspective, from a conservation perspective, it's absolutely criminal to smash these places apart. Moonlight Range. So I actually thanked the local member this morning. The state government did knock this one back. However, what has happened here is the state government knocked this one back. So Brookfields, who are the owners, they're a $1 trillion fund manager based in Canada. They've gone to Chrysophilia, we'll stuff you. You've knocked it back. We're going to go to Murray Watt anyway and get him to approve it and walk over the state if they can. So even though the state has knocked this one back, it's now sitting with Murray Watt for approval anyway. So some of the most important work that we've done is we've generated a website for all Australians to use. This is what Chris Bowen should be doing. But we've generated a website that shows where all the renewables are that we can find in Australia. It's called australianrenewables.app. And what I've done is I've done a snapshot here of just this local geographic area. And as you can see, the yellow dots are the proposed wind turbines. The orange dots are the existing wind turbines. The green areas are where wind farms are going, but I don't know where the actual footprints are going. But you can really quickly see what's going on. I can't use the pointer here, but you can see that these ones here are hooking into that transmission. All of this will be wind farms, okay, along the transmission line. And then you've got Bungaban Wind Farm, and they're punching in this new transmission to connect. So you can sort of see what's going on. So wherever there is high voltage transmission lines, that is where the industry wants to go. If I zoom in a bit more, you can sort of see. So you can see the Bungaban Wind Farm to the north, and I don't know who's paying for that transmission. I don't know if it's taxpayers or Andrew Forrest, but that will be connected back down to that southern line. That's another generation of that map. So we do a little bit of mapping. Okay, so that Bungaban Wind Farm, where is it going in terms of tenure with cadastral boundaries? Where is it going in terms of remnant of concern, vulnerable, threatened vegetation types? The Bungaban's not hitting any remnant. But then we spoke about cumulative impacts before, and then you look at it, okay, what's happening around? So you've got 100 turbines at Bungaban, but then you're going to have another 100 turbines just down the road at Middle Creek Wind Farm. So it's that cumulative impact. We look at other wind farms like Caribou, and you've got haulage roads 70 metres wide punching through of concern. Of concern. So the key figures from all the mapping that we've done, if you look at Australia-wide, around 46,000 kilometres of new roads will need to be developed to push through all those turbines. There's around 447,000 hectares proposed for solar. At the moment, there's 29,000 hectares already of solar. And there's a proposed 31,000 additional wind turbines in the pipeline at different stages of the approval process. And if you add up all the capital costs of all those projects, which we've done, it comes to $1.38 trillion. And Chris Bowen was asked these questions. So the coalition last year, October last year, was asked Chris Bowen on the floor of Parliament, with this data, is this right? Is there 447,000 hectares of solar? Is there 31,000 wind towers? It's going to cost 1.3 trillion. Is this right, Chris Bowen? And he just deviated, changed the subject, and he's never answered the question. So as far as we know, we are the only people doing this work. And if this is a $1 trillion industry, how come it's a volunteer group doing the work? This is criminal. This is the biggest public policy failure of my lifetime. If we look at Australia, these are all the existing renewables across the continent. If we were to build the 31,000 wind towers, that's the spatial footprint. But there's been a bit of modelling done by an organisation called Net Zero, and Net Zero is a consortium of scientists from University of Queensland and Princeton University. And what they did, they said, well, if we're going to reach net zero, and net zero means, decarbonisation of everything, even heavy industry, through the use of hydrogen, we'll need and we want to put all that technology into areas of low biodiversity, low value agricultural land. How much land do we need? And this is the model that they've come up with. So we need basically 7 times the spatial footprint of the size of Tasmania to try to get to that green energy superpower status, which includes the production of hydrogen. And the people that sponsored this study is Mingaloo Foundation, which is Andrew Forrest, the Australian Conservation Foundation, and the Climate Council. So you've got to laugh. Talk about vested interests. So we did our own mapping. Okay, well that's what the Net Zero report says, but what's happening on the ground? This is what's actually physically happening on the ground. So we've mapped where all the renewable energy projects are going, and those mustered polygons, they're all the renewable energy zones across the nation. Okay, so each state allocates different renewable energy zones, and each zone is allocated an amount of installed capacity. So, for example, I just listened to a podcast yesterday, and the Central West Res in the New England tableland in New South Wales will have an installed capacity of about 8 gigawatts of new renewable energy projects. So that's the reality. And the media, the mass media in Australia is not asking our politicians the hard questions. Can Chris Bowen please show us a map where these renewables are going? Where are they planned? Where are they proposed? What's the cumulative impact? What are the issues on regional communities, higher value agriculture, high value biodiversity? So why do we need so many turbines? Why do we need 31,000 additional turbines on top of the 6,000 that are already existing? It's because of its low capacity factor. They run at very low capacity factor. Like I said at the start of the show, I talked about Mount Emerald was going to deliver power for 90,000 homes. It only delivered power to 90,000 homes for perhaps 1 hour in the whole year of 2024. It mostly delivers really low capacity. So that bottom bar, that long one at the bottom, is the total number of hours below 10 megawatts of output capacity. And then it gradually goes up. So most of the time it's generating really low capacity factors. And if we look at it in this way, if you tabulate it out, Mount Emerald really ran at 22% capacity factor, the median capacity factor. So even though it's installed at 180 megawatts installed, it only runs at 22% of that for the year of 2024. That's why we need so much of this junk. For 21 days in 2024, cumulatively, it generated zero, no electricity at all. And this is a $500 million kit. And for 21 days, it generated nothing. Well, that was before COVID. This was back in the late 2017. The prices have gone up now. They're very expensive. To do that same wind farm would be about 1.5 billion. So then we start looking at the company, Ratch. I mentioned Ratch is the proponent. Ratch is majority owned by the Thai royal family. In 2021, 2022, this is off the ABC website because the ABC publishes the top 100 companies in Australia that pays no tax. Ratch is now in one of the top 100 companies, and in that financial year, it had an income of $161 million. The following year, $212 million, no tax. So we hear the conservation groups talking about the fossil fuel sector, not paying their fair share. Renewables, I'd say, are even worse than that because they're not even paying royalties either. So there's actually no royalties coming in to prop up our police and hospitals and education, where at least the fossil fuel industry is actually paying royalties and we're getting some sort of benefit out of it. So this is the integrated system plan. You might have heard of the integrated system plan. It's the holy grail, the holy Bible of the 2030, 2050 transition. And you can see the black at the bottom, that's black coal, brown coal. The dashed line running vertically is 2026 today. And what we need to do is phase out the black coal, brown coal, and then overbuild the electricity system by a factor of 6, which is what it says down the bottom in the document, for the intermittent nature of renewables. But if you look at this, that purple colour is actually what they call CER, consumer energy resources. And that's hypothetical, a hypothetical thing, assuming that we're all going to go and buy Tesla Powerwalls, solar panels, smart meters, and feed our electricity back into the grid to keep the lights on in hospitals at night. It's all hypothetical. And if you look at the aqua blue colour at the bottom, that's gas. And we need to install 15 gigawatts of new gas generating capacity to run when the lights don't work because the wind doesn't blow. Yep.
You might be able to help us there because Albo's election promise was we can all run on solar at night. I can't find that.
That's right. Yeah. So the light yellow is rooftop solar, dark yellow is utility solar, green is wind, purple is coordinated or consumer energy resources, blue is hydro, and then the light blue is new gas to be built. So, and then we talk about the whole net zero superpower scenario, hydrogen. Hydrogen blows my brain. It is huge. So, for example, this is one project sitting with Murray Watt right now, and we've even underwritten this project to the tune of $800 million that has been promised to Copenhagen infrastructure partners to make this viable for them. This is over 50,000 hectares, 700 turbines, 10,000 hectares of solar to create hydrogen, right next to Kalbarri National Park. So, for example, an image like this of Kalbarri National Park will have all turbines off in the distance. The other one, green energy. The other one is the Western Green Energy Hub. This is also sitting with Murray Watt right now for approval. This is in the Nullarbor on the coast. My conservationist friends are fighting tooth and nail right now to get the limestone caves dedicated as World Heritage before the turbines get there that will destroy them. This is a race against renewable energy. So this is huge. It consists of 3,000 wind towers and 60 million solar panels. 60 million solar panels. And they'll have to, and then the dredging out of a deep water port to ship out the ammonia. And then the receiving country will then need to use some form of green energy to convert it back to hydrogen so you can use it. It's crazy stuff. But people are talking about this seriously. And to me, it's complete delusion. It's dystopia. If you overlay the footprint of that one wind farm over the state of Victoria, that's the size of it. That's the size of the wind farm over the state of Tasmania. So from my perspective, the environment doesn't stand a chance with renewables. And we hear it constantly, we need renewable energy. And we heard some speakers this morning about the EPBC reforms. And from my perspective, the EPBC reforms were purely put through in such rush and haste to facilitate the fast tracking of renewables and critical mineral mining to facilitate renewables. That's what it was all about. And from a conservation perspective, we've been trying to get reforms to the EPBC Act for a decade. And it was like banging your head up against a brick wall. But now that you've got a $1 trillion renewable energy sector going, well, the EPBC is slowing us down. And within 3-4 weeks, they reformed the entire Act in such rush and haste. And it was all, from my perspective, this is what it's all about. And they're probably snuck in all these other clauses, like you were talking about this morning, to make life harder for primary producers so from my perspective, we need biodiversity. And these projects, particularly in Queensland, are going in some of the best high biodiversity areas. And I've just started including these two last slides before I wind up. And you might have, you know about the Vegetation Management Act that John Howard, the Vegetation Management Act that was brought in under Beattie. So that was really started under the Kyoto Protocol, where John Howard had to show that there was going to be emission reductions under the Kyoto. So he must have phoned up Premier Beattie. Beattie said, John Howard said, well, we need to somehow show that we're reducing emissions, but they didn't want to reduce fossil fuels, so we got the Australia clause. And the Australia clause was that we're going to reduce land clearing, which was going to sequester carbon and make us carbon positive, or decrease our carbon. And that's how it all started in 2005. And so if you look at a graph here, this is done by the Australia Institute. And it was actually Stephen Wilson, an energy engineer, that put me onto this. And this is the Australia Institute. So this is a left-wing think tank. They've published the data that our emissions have only dropped by 3% by using technology such as wind, sun and batteries. So our emissions have only dropped 3% from technology. So the amount of billions of dollars that we've spent on our rooftop solar and all of the technology so far has only dropped emissions 3%. The real emission reductions has been from land use change by a factor of about 14%. So when you hear Chris Bowen say that our emissions have dropped by 14, 15, 16 or 17%, that's because land use change is doing the heavy lifting, okay, which is code for leave trees in the ground. So that's what's happening. And so it's really not the technology that's bringing the emissions down, it's the land use change. And in actual fact, under the Net Zero report, it was published in there that we'll need 7 million hectares of land reforested to try to meet those 2050 targets for carbon sequestration. Yeah, so, and this is another slide that sort of articulates that a bit better actually. So 90% of our drop in emissions comes from land use change. And Matt Canavan has done really well to show this publicly as well. Yes.
Stephen, I just think that we should probably point out to you, since you're mentioning Peter Beattie's and John Howard's involvement in this, I'm not sure where you were back then on the political argument relative to us as agricultural industry. But when you talk about land use change, I just see it as a blatant theft of our land rights. And most of those trees, lots of those trees, were on freehold land where the farmers had actually paid the government for those trees, so we owned them. And those trees were blatantly stolen from us. And the carbon credits used to offset Australia's emissions, and you've demonstrated that there. And for that, we as producers received zilch, zero, nothing. Blatant theft. And often in agriculture, we talk about ourselves being a small group of people with very little political influence, but often we just need to remind people, and I appreciate that we've come onto the same argument, the same side of this argument, but often if you ever wonder why people in regional Australia, and particularly in regional Queensland, get very frustrated when we see things like this, it is because that value was stolen from us. All day I've just been getting crankier and crankier and crankier as the presenters have been coming on. And finally you just tipped me over the threshold. But the only thing I will say is you give me hope, because so often we say governments can do nothing. We're powerless. But your slideshow has just demonstrated to us the power of what governments can do. And in this case, it's blatantly wrong and improper and immoral, but they can do it if they want to. So from this organisation today, the challenge going forward to our political leaders, to Anne Lay, who was in the room earlier, is to say, don't tell us any longer it can't be done. We've seen it being done, you can do it, and we need you to change things into the future.
Yeah, so I suppose you're exactly right, because the political will is there to roll this stuff out with no transparency. They seem to do it. So, you know, the hypocrisy is incredible. I shake my head in disbelief that all this can occur. There's actually no cost-benefit analysis. No one has done, whether it be from land use change or the physical cost of building this stuff. Where is the business model? Where's the none of it's been done. It's crazy. Yep. So my thoughts from a conservation view is, should we be clearing and fragmenting forests for renewables? Are we going down the wrong path that has failed elsewhere? And by what I mean by that, if we look at the only other place where this is being done is Germany. So Germany have got 41,000 wind towers, and they've now got some of the highest emissions in Europe and also some of the highest energy prices in Europe. And what they're doing is deindustrialising. So their manufacturing base is going to India, Indonesia and China, and that's what's happening with us. Okay, we've already lost our glass industry, which we need industrial heat for that, which can only be done by coal and gas. And we're going to lose our aluminium, our steel, everything, our manufacturing base. And that's what's happening to Germany. And the reason why Germany is decarbonising is because it's losing its industrial base, and it's offshoring its emissions over to India, Indonesia and China. And we're using their cheap coal to build the assets that we buy back. And that's what's happening in Australia. And that's, solutions. So all zero emissions options should be on the table. That's it. So thank you. Thank you for your time. Yes, so there's one question there.
Just on the relevance of hydrogen, which is a very little known fact, there's several factors included in that that are just so negative. It is not the answer. You lose 1/3 of all energy used to create it, so there's a loss there. The fact that it also has the effects of creating embrittlement in the container it's held in, which can then cause a horrendous explosion, because if it's held as a gas, it's at over 1,000 psi. If it's held as a liquid, it's minus 100 and something degrees.
And you've got to keep it at that temperature.
Minus 100 and something degrees.
And
using hydrogen in that form as an energy, to me, is just not even effective. Two other things I'd like to mention is I've actually had an article in the Queensland Country Life about this, is actually calling these things farms. They do not fit the criteria to be a farm. You can't plant little turbines and grow big turbines. They're just not a farm. Another point on that matter is the whole principle of how these turbines operate with a propeller-style, aeroplane propeller-style blade is so inefficient at capturing energy, unlike that great windmill there on the poster behind you. And I say that because have you ever seen anyone try and push start an aeroplane down the runway? It just doesn't work. So that's why I call them ruinables, not renewables.
So they're all good points. But I'll just add to that there is a really serious issue, which is low frequency sound, and that is really coming out quite evident now in the literature, and there's some scientists now working on that. And low frequency sound is a big issue, and I work with landowners in North Queensland or around Australia who live on the 1.5 kilometre setbacks is too small. The setbacks need to be far greater, and the 1.5 setbacks causes serious health issues, and right out to really 3 kilometres, and the low frequency sound is being modelled now out to 10 kilometres. And so we've got a koala expert in North Queensland, Dr. Roger Martin, the most preeminent koala expert. He's been taking it upon himself for free. It's all being done by volunteers. This isn't being done by the government. He's radio tracking koalas, and his early information is showing that koalas will not come near wind towers because they can pick up on the low frequency. You have to remember koalas have the big ears. They've got a cavity in the cranium to pick up on low frequencies, so the male can communicate with the female along long distances, just like elephants. Elephants have big ears. They can communicate over 10 kilometres. You start putting low frequency sound, which is sound that we can't hear. The low frequency is the sound of a 40-tonne, 80-metre blade thumping against the tower, and that compression of air. And it's being done by 100 towers across that. And that compression is causing low frequency out to 10 kilometres away, if all the conditions are right. And that's not even being studied, hasn't been considered in any of the approval processes.
I'd just like you to hear your thoughts, and from a position of complete scientific ignorance. What's the only sort of energy generation not mentioned is nuclear. I know there's laws against it currently in place, so it's just a discussion point. But I'd actually like to hear your thoughts as a conservationist and somebody who knows a lot of the biodiversity behind it and understands a lot more than I do.
So again, look, I was naive about renewable energy, and I was naive about nuclear. So I started doing this mapping back in 2017, 2018. I saw what was going on, the scale, and I thought, this is crazy. This is not sustainable. It's not going to work, because we still need to be reliant on fossil fuels such as gas. And so a mate of mine said, Stephen, look at nuclear. Nuclear is a no-brainer. I said, no, you can't. So I put all my ideology aside, read books, spoke to professionals, watched a lot of YouTube videos with energy experts, and now I'm a nuclear fanatic. Because nuclear requires the least amount of materials per terawatt hour of any energy except hydro, of any energy generator. And nuclear is just, what we can do with nuclear is actually build nuclear plants next to existing coal plants, the same workforce, highly skilled workforce, and the best thing is we can use the existing transmission lines. We don't need 10,000 kilometres of new transmission, cutting through people's backyards, people's properties. So we can use existing transmission, and they're built to last. So the new generators can last 80 years, even up to 100 years. So the period of payoff is so long. It's like our coal plants. We've paid all our coal plants off. They generate the cheapest electricity ever known that we've ever had. We had the cheapest electricity prices of any industrialised nation on earth because we had cheap coal, cheap energy generation through coal plants, and our country prospered. And what we're doing now is going to intermittent, unreliable energy. And when you make something scarce, it becomes expensive. So we're making our energy generation scarce. So my attitude is we make energy generation abundant, which is what nuclear does, and that brings down energy, and that's how we become an energy superpower. We actually become a superpower through nuclear. Yeah.
At the end of last year, I went to Tasmania, to the northwest,
Yep.
and we went on to a turbine on a wind farm,
Yep.
which they claimed was the oldest one in
Yep.
Australia. They said they'd been there for 25 years.
Yep.
They are about to renew all the turbines, make them bigger, and because they've had their day. So 25 years does not take very long to come to fruition, and then you've got to start all over again.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. So those ones in Tassie, I think they were the oldest. The second oldest are Windy Hill, up where I live at Ravenshoe. But they're very small towers. So with the new generation of wind towers, they cannot, you cannot recycle the concrete slabs. Okay, the concrete foundations will need to stay there in situ. They'll never be moved, and they'll need to put new foundations in because of the concrete fatigue. The reason I know that is because Squadron Energy mentioned that to to Glenn Kelly, the member for Morani. He did a tour of Clark Creek, and he asked that very question: can these foundations be reused? He said no, because of the concrete fatigue. They need to redo new foundations. And you've got to remember, the second highest emitting industry on earth is the production of cement. And we've got to build 31,000 additional wind towers at 1,000 cubic metres per tower. If you do the sums, it's astronomical. Yeah. And then replace them all in 20, 25 years. Yeah.
Steve, is it a fact that wind towers sitting on a hill can disrupt what used to be the wind up one side and down the other?
Yep.
And those wind towers are now upsetting the downside for people living there?
Yeah, well, yeah, so there's been some good studies, and it has been proven that it dries the land out, the vegetation. Yeah, so that's fact. Yeah, so it does change the microclimates in those areas, yes. And that's a fact, it's all peer reviewed, yes.
Sorry, more of a statement than a question,
Yes.
but if those bases can only last 15 years, I have extremely grave concerns for all the high-rise buildings around the cities.
Well, 25 years, it's the stress, it'd be the stress and fatigue, yeah. But it's more so the nacelle. I think the nacelle, the centre gearbox, can't last more than 25 years. That's why they get decommissioned, yeah. The other thing too is no one has shown me what a decommissioning plan is. If anyone finds a decommissioning plan, can you show me? Because the decommissioning plan is a private agreement between the host landowner and the developer. Okay, so we're not privy to that. So I see a future where we're going to see tens of thousands of wind towers that are past their use-by date, and they'll stand there forever, rusting in situ as a lasting legacy to our stupidity. Because there won't be the money available in 25 years to pull the things down. Because to pull them down, you've got to bring the 800-tonne crane back in, pull it all down. It's a very expensive process.
$1.8 million per turbine to dismantle.
Yeah. Yes.
When these wind towers start, is it true that they're starting to...
Yeah, so they shed. Yeah, so so that again, really good fact. My wife's friend does the work. So he's a contractor. He goes around to all the wind farms, fixing up the leading edge of blades. And that Mount Emerald wind farm, he was up near us recently, and that was because they were already starting to honeycomb out. So the leading edge honeycomb out, and he was there repairing them. Yep. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so yeah, it's all. Yeah, I'm not too. Yeah, so there is issues around that, and also there's issues about the shedding of that into agricultural land. I know it's impacted the agricultural industry and the production of beef. Yes, but I'm not the person to ask about that. But one more thing. The other thing too, like we had a gentleman this morning talking about coal seam gas and the fact that they need to fix those wells up before they leave. And there's probably an environmental bond for that. There is no environmental bonds for renewable energy in Australia. Okay, so you saw those mountains getting blasted out. They'll just get left there. There's no environmental bonds to try to remediate and repair those mountains once they walk away. And as a bare minimum, we need that, and that's just not even on the table. I know the Coalition has been trying to push that with the Federal Labor Party, but the Greens and Labor just won't get it up. Yeah. I've got some calendars there. There's only about 5 or 6 celebrating nature refuges in Queensland. I'm a big fan of nature refuges. If landholders want to, dedicate their land to nature conservation. So there's 12 images from different nature refuges around Queensland. So if you're into it, just grab one for yourself. Yep.